thanks for checking out my channel. If you are unfamiliar with me, my name is Megan Schrupp. I am a holistic health coach turned wellness blogger, and I also have type 1 diabetes, which is what a lot of my content is based on. If you are interested in those kind of topics, head over to my channel and subscribe. I have lots of fun videos there, or check out my blog. I will link it below. But today I want to talk about the menstrual cycle and type 1 diabetes. Before we dive into all that, I just want to quickly put a disclaimer out there. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. Don't change any of your dosing, any of your medicines, anything without first working with your healthcare provider or your doctor. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the menstrual cycle and type 1 diabetes. I wanted to talk about this because it personally was a struggle for me. Particularly, I struggled with my basal rates for a very long time. So just to give you an example, say my basal rate on my pump was 0.55 units per hour. And some days that would work wonderful. I would be in range and it would be great. And then the next day, maybe 0.55 wouldn't be a good basal rate anymore and I would be crashing with lows. Or maybe the 0.55 wasn't enough and I was sitting high all day. And I could never figure out what the heck was going on. Like, why did 0.55 for my basal rate work on some days and then other days it was not enough or too much? Like, what the heck was going on? And it wasn't until I understood the menstrual cycle and how it was affecting my blood sugars that it really started to make sense to me. And now I'm able to predict what my blood sugars are going to be. I know on the days that I'm going to need a little bit more insulin, and I know the days that I'm going to need a little bit less, and I can correct ahead of time, and that way my blood sugars spend more time in range and I'm not all over the place, and I finally have an understanding. So understanding the menstrual cycle really helped me a lot. Before we really dive into this, I do want to say that every single body and person is different. It works differently. Everyone has their own way that their body functions. And so what I talk about today and my story may not necessarily be true for you. So I definitely encourage you to experiment with yourself and figure out kind of what works for you. And I also put together a PDF to help you do this, because the menstrual cycle and tying in blood sugars, it's a lot and it can be a little bit confusing. So I put together a whole PDF, I linked it below, that can kind of help you work through understanding your own menstrual cycle and how it affects your blood sugars. Before we actually start talking about the menstrual cycle, I want to talk about two different hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So I'm going to go ahead and write those out. So there's more hormones involved in the menstrual cycle besides just these two, but these are the two that I'm going to focus on today, and these are the two that have a big impact on blood sugars. So estrogen, generally, I say generally because it may not be true for you, so always test out what works for you, but generally estrogen is related to a decrease in insulin resistance. So if you have a lot of estrogen in your body, you may be very sensitive to insulin, so you may not need as much. Or if you don't adjust your insulins, you might notice more low blood sugars during times where estrogen is high. Progesterone, on the other hand, is the opposite. So when progesterone is high, there is also higher insulin resistance. So that means when progesterone is high in your body, you might need more insulin, or you might notice that your blood sugars are running higher during those times. I do want to point out also that you may be more or less sensitive to one of these than you are the other. So maybe estrogen doesn't really affect you or your blood sugars, but when progesterone levels change, you really notice your blood sugar levels are different. So that's why you really have to test for yourself and what's going on specifically in your body. Okay, so let's dive into the menstrual cycle. First of all, what is the menstrual cycle? Because it's not just your period, it's the whole month or the whole cycle. So the menstrual cycle is basically the series of changes that the female body goes through as it prepares for a possible pregnancy. So the length of a menstrual cycle can really vary. It can even vary from cycle to cycle. Typically, like the average is 28 days, but it can range from 21 to 35 days. It really, there's no like right day amount for the menstrual cycle. On that note, I do want to say that this video really only applies to diabetic women who are not on any sort of birth control, and also who have fairly regular periods. So if your periods are irregular, it's going to be pretty hard to figure this one out. Also, if you're on birth control, this video will not apply to you. So let's dive into the first phase of the menstrual cycle. So phase number 1 is the menstrual phase. So there's the only reason that the menstrual phase is number 1, the first phase, is because it's the most obvious when it starts. So the menstrual phase is when you are on your period, when you are bleeding. And so the first day of the menstrual phase is obviously the first day that you get your period. The actual length of time for the menstrual phase can vary. They say generally 3 to 7 days, so I just kind of went with an average and went with 5 days for our graph. What's going on in the menstrual phase is that progesterone has dropped, and that drop in progesterone in the body is what causes the uterine lining to shed. So the drop in progesterone is what causes you to start your period. Coming into the menstrual phase, progesterone is high and it's dropping off, and that's what causes the period to begin. But if you remember when we were talking about progesterone, we said progesterone is usually related to insulin resistance. So as that progesterone drops, you might start to notice that your insulin resistance is dropping too. So you're needing less and less and less insulin as that progesterone drops. Or maybe you're noticing more low blood sugars near the end of your period. But near the beginning, where this progesterone levels are high, you might notice that you're needing more insulin because you still are high in progesterone levels in your body. During the menstrual phase, estrogen is hanging out pretty level here. So not too many changes in estrogen during the menstrual phase. The biggest changes are the changes in progesterone. So any changes in your blood sugars during this time might be related to those progesterone changes. So what's actually going on during the menstrual phase? So obviously your uterine lining is shedding, you're bleeding. This takes a lot of energy from the body. So you might notice that you are fatigued, you're tired, you don't have a lot of energy. Tune into that and listen to yourself. This phase, this is the you phase. So this phase should all be about you. Do what you need. Instead of doing intense workouts, maybe just go for a walk, do some yoga, do some stretching. Take it easy. Just listen to what your body needs during this time, because your body is doing a lot. So maybe it's a hot bath or some tea, like whatever feels good for you during the menstrual phase. Another thing that is going on during the menstrual phase, as you're bleeding, you are losing iron because you're losing blood. So you can support your body by eating foods that are rich in iron. So that can look like red meat like beef. If you're a vegetarian, black beans, dark leafy greens like spinach, cacao powder, all of those are really good options. But you also want to consider upping your vitamin C, because vitamin C is important for iron absorption. So just to kind of review the menstrual phase, progesterone is dropping off, which causes you to start your period. That drop in progesterone, your insulin needs might drop too, because progesterone is related to insulin resistance. So you might notice that near the end of the menstrual phase, you're needing less and less insulin, or you're having lower blood sugars. Just a reminder, the menstrual phase takes a lot of energy, so make sure you focus on yourself. You might also not want to plan too many social activities during this time because you might be really worn out. Increasing iron because you are losing a lot of blood. Okay, let's move on to the next phase. So the next phase in the cycle is called the follicular phase. So during this phase, the follicles that hold the little egg that's going to be released during ovulation are preparing for that release. So while they do that, they secrete estrogen. So we're going to see estrogen levels start to increase. And they really peak at the very end of the follicular phase. So As estrogen levels increase, remember estrogen is related to a decrease in insulin resistance. So as estrogen increases, you might notice that you don't need as much insulin because you're not so resistant. Or you might notice that during this time you're having a lot of low blood sugars because the insulin that had been working for you is now working too well for you because you don't have that insulin resistance. And so now you're seeing a lot of low blood sugars. So that might be something to be familiar with. The progesterone levels during this time are staying relatively steady. So the length of the follicular phase really can vary. It can be about a week, 11 days, 16 days, up to like 27 days. There's a lot of variability in this follicular phase. As estrogen is increasing here, you might notice that you have a lot more energy. So this is a good time to try those new workouts or to do a more intense workout because you're probably feeling pretty good and pretty energized. Another thing to be aware of in the follicular phase, our minds are a lot sharper. They're thinking much more quickly. So it's a good time to get creative. It's a good time for social events. It's a good time to be busy, to be thinking about your goals. This is when you're going to have the most energy of your cycle. Okay, so now our next phase is our ovulation phase. So this is when that egg is actually released from the follicle. During this phase, we start to see the drop in estrogen, and progesterone is still pretty low here. Okay, so the ovulation phase is always for everyone one day. It only happens on one day. So you might not really notice too many like blood sugar related hormone changes during the ovulation phase just because it is only that one day. So after the egg is released, then the body is preparing for possible fertilization or a possible pregnancy. So that progesterone is going to start to increase as we move into the luteal phase. Okay, so this is the final fourth phase of the menstrual cycle. So in the luteal phase, we do have a drop in estrogen. It does tend to kind of rise up a little bit, but then it lowers back down into just kind of like a baseline range. But that progesterone really takes off because our body is preparing for a possible pregnancy. So it really takes off, and then it starts to drop if there is no pregnancy. So during this time, as the progesterone really increases, you might start to notice some more insulin resistance in your body, or you might notice higher blood sugars because that insulin resistance is likely increasing with the rise in progesterone, particularly near the end of this phase. So about the week before your period, because that estrogen has really dropped off and you still have the progesterone that's high in your body. So really in this last week, maybe into the first few days of your next period. But this area is where you may notice the highest blood sugars, the most insulin resistance. You can support yourself by also taking it really easy on yourself during this phase. So during the luteal phase, as we have that drop in estrogen, we're likely also going to have a drop in energy. So estrogen gives us energy, but as we lose it, we are also going to lose that surge of energy. So be kind to yourself, take it easy, maybe move back into the like yoga, walking, a little bit lighter exercises. Can be good to take B vitamins during this time. So B vitamins help boost serotonin levels, which are those feel-good hormones in the body. So this is also the time when you may start to experience PMS symptoms. So if you start to experience those things, just tune in, be kind to yourself, and listen to your body and do what your body needs. Usually in the luteal phase, especially in the second half of it, we're not going to be feeling like doing many social activities. So just kind of be aware of that. Maybe don't plan a whole lot. Allow yourself to just kind of be with yourself and just focus on you during this last final phase of the menstrual cycle. So that's kind of the general 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. So figuring this out really helped me understand my own blood sugars. So I respond pretty true to progesterone causing me to have insulin resistance and estrogen causing me to have lower insulin resistance or being more insulin sensitive. So during my menstrual phase, especially near the end, I definitely tend to run lower. So now I know to take less insulin, lower my basal rate. Maybe I don't need so much at meals because I know that that progesterone has dropped off near the end of my menstrual phase and I'm not going to need so much insulin. So that's helped me avoid those stubborn days where I'm just running low all the time. Follicular phase, when that estrogen is really shooting up, I still have a very low insulin resistance. So I keep my basal rates low during about the first week or so after my period. And then as I move into the luteal phase, I expect this surge in progesterone. So I expect my insulin resistance to be higher. So I know that I'm going to need more insulin, especially in about the week or so before my period, because that estrogen has dropped off, progesterone is still really high. So understanding this has helped me predict my blood sugars, and now I know what the heck is going on instead of being like so confused with my sugars all the time. So this is what worked for me. Like I said earlier, everyone's body is different and hormones may affect you differently. Maybe you run higher during your period. Maybe estrogen doesn't affect you as much. So to really understand your own body and to figure out how your menstrual cycle affects your blood sugars, I put together a PDF guide to help you do so. So again, that is linked below. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please subscribe and head over to my blog, which is also linked below. I'll see you next time.